this lesson, we're going to look at membranes in the body and what they do. So the overall functions of membranes are to line body cavities, cover organs, and line the heart, blood vessels, and lymph vessels. Now, there's two main types of membranes. There's mucous membranes, which secrete mucus, and serous membranes, which secrete a watery secretion. Now, membranes are composed of some sort of epithelial tissue, and then it's attached to another structure like muscle or connective tissue. So first, let's talk about mucous membranes. Mucous membranes line open body cavities. So what does that mean? An open body cavity is one that has a continuity or opens up to the outside of the body. So let's look at these. The buccal cavity, that's the mouth. The nasal cavity is the nose. So that's where they open up to the outside. The respiratory tract opens to the outside as well through those same places. We also see an opening at both ends of the digestive tract in the mouth as well as the anal canal. And then the genitourinary system includes both the urinary or excretory system and the reproductive system. And all of those body systems open to the outside. And therefore, all of these body systems are lined with mucous membranes. So what are mucous membranes made of and what do they do? Mucous membranes are composed of really any type of epithelial tissue except simple squamous or stratified cuboidal. Now, if you need a refresher on this, make sure you check out the types of epithelial tissues lesson. Now, in terms of the mucus secreting part of this membrane, it could either be with goblet cells, which are unicellular mucus glands, or it could be with actual full mucus glands. And then that epithelial tissue is connected by areolar connective tissue to some sort of smooth or skeletal muscle. Now, mucous membranes serve to protect, secrete mucus, and have a role in absorption, especially in the digestive tract. So now let's talk about serous membranes. Serous membranes serve to line closed body cavities. So by deduction, we can figure out that closed body cavities are ones that don't open to the outside, right? So this includes our thoracic cavity. Our thoracic cavity goes from the top of the diaphragm around the rib cage to the top of the lungs and all the way around front to back. So it basically lines the inside of our rib cage. Then our abdominal pelvic cavity goes from the bottom of the diaphragm down to the top of the bladder and all the way around. And then we also have a sac around our heart called the pericardial sac. So that is also a serous membrane. And then we also see our internal organs covered by serous membranes, as well as the inner linings of the heart, blood vessels, and lymph vessels. So let's look more specifically at a couple of types of serous membranes that you need to know about. So the first is pleura or pleural membranes, which are associated with the lungs. So what you'll see is with each of these, you have two types. You have a parietal membrane and you have a visceral membrane. Parietal means the cavity or the space. So parietal pleura lines the space around the lungs or the thoracic cavity. So again, this goes the top of the diaphragm all the way to the top of the lungs and around the rib cage. And so basically, like I said, it's connected to the inside of our ribs and our intercostal muscles. And then visceral means organ. So the visceral pleura covers the lungs themselves. So you actually see this serous membrane connected right up to the outside of the lungs themselves. Now, when you get to the breathing movements lesson in the respiratory module of this course, you'll also see that there's a fluid in here between these membranes, and that actually helps keep them stuck together so that the lungs don't collapse. That's called the pleural fluid, and it's the watery substance that these serous membranes secrete. So next is peritoneum. The peritoneum is associated with the abdominal pelvic cavity. So again, parietal means cavity. So the parietal peritoneum surrounds the abdominal pelvic cavity. So again, that goes from the bottom of the diaphragm all the way down to the top of the bladder and around the abdominal cavity. And then visceral means organ. So the visceral peritoneum covers the organs in these cavities. Now, What you'll see here is the bladder is down here, is actually below this membrane. Well, there's actually something called retroperitoneal. And retro just means behind. So we actually have, what we see here is that the entire genitourinary system, so the kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra, all the reproductive organs are actually outside of this peritoneum. And so we call them retroperitoneal. So last is the pericardium. Pericardium is associated with the heart. I think peri means around and cardium means heart. So the parietal pericardium, again, that's the cavity or the space. The parietal pericardium is the sac around the heart, also called the pericardial sac. And then the visceral pericardium surrounds the heart itself. And just like in the pleural space, there's fluid that fills this space here, and it's called the pericardial fluid. And the benefit of that is it helps to cushion and protect the heart from friction while it's beating. Now, when it comes to the heart and the blood vessels, we also have endocardium, which is, if you break down this word, endo means inside. So this is the lining of the heart itself on the inside. And then we also have endothelium. And endothelium lines the blood vessels. And those are also serous membranes. So serous membranes, y'all, are super thin. They are only made of simple squamous epithelium. If you remember from those lessons, that means it's a single layer of thin, flat cells. So these serous membranes serve as protection against friction because of that watery substance they secrete. It's like a slip and slide in there. So they also help to suspend organs in place and can help with fluid balance because they can filter and absorb fluid through this super thin membrane. Now we also again see the pleural membranes helping to keep the lungs expanded and keep them from collapsing. And then the endothelium inside the blood vessels helps to keep our blood from clotting. So y'all, these membranes are a huge part of keeping all of our organs working right every single day, and we don't even know it. So make sure that you know that membranes serve to line and cover our cavities and organs. There's two main types, mucus and serous. Mucus is a mucousy secretion, serous is watery. And then remember that serous membranes are either visceral or parietal, depending on whether they cover an organ or line a cavity. So that's it for our lesson on membranes. Make sure you check out all the resources attached to this lesson. Now go out and be your best selves today, guys. And as always, happy nursing.